Good morning. Everyone take a seat so we could get an actual count here. And then we'll get started.
I don't know till we take roll call.
Okay, all right then. Let's call the meeting to order for the 20th of July, 2019. It is 9:05. Please stand for pledge of allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Hollenbeck, are there any new appointments?
No, there are not. We have not received any notification from appointing authorities of any change in our membership, so there are no new commissioners to introduce.
Thank you, sir. Roll call, please.
Kyle Allen, Dwayne Arndt, Jeanette Bass, Thomas Black,
Present.
Kevin Brightsky,
Here.
Robert Carnahan,
Here.
Bill Carroll, Tim Clayton,
Present.
Anthony Copeland, Don Kraft,
Here.
Jocelyn Denham, Tom Dermody, Dinah Dumbrus,
Here.
Denise Ebert,
Here.
Bill Emerson,
Here.
Robert Forster,
Here.
Connie Bremerosa,
Present.
Richard Hardaway,
Here.
Tony Hendricks, Ellen Hunt,
Here.
Jack Geralds,
Here.
Jane Jordan,
Here.
Justin Keel,
Present.
Scott Kingan, Peter Land, Robert Lemay,
Here.
Sue Lynch,
Here.
Tom McDermott, Lori Mercer, Wendy Miss,
Present.
Edward Morales,
Here.
Matt Murphy, Randall Niemeyer, Dwayne Perry, David Peeler, Jim Pressel, Jerome Prince, Barb Regnitz, Lisa Rosenkrantz, Regina Riddell,
Here.
Rick Rifa, Tom Schmidt,
Here.
Brian Snedecorf, Steve Spivard, Red Stone, Gerald Swets,
Present.
Sharon Zwido, here. Mary Tanis,
Last evening, I was decommissioned by 3 of my town council members, so I will be leaving. I will say that I've enjoyed everybody's company here. Everybody's been really helpful. And our friendship will continue. If you ever need me for anything, let me know. If there's ever a part in, any position on the board, I would be more than welcome to do that. But I will be leaving now, but I've enjoyed it when I was here, and hopefully I'll be back. I will be leaving.
She's leaving. Physically leaving. I understand the concept. She's more on it than she gets. Thank you for your service, Barry.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
continuing, Jim Tunn,
Present.
George Topple,
Present.
John Yelkich. We are at 26, one short of full commission.
We can convene as an
We
executive.
can convene at, one moment. Yes, we can convene as executive board, we have 7, we need 6.
Plan B, executive board.
Okay, at this time, because we're one short of a quorum for a full commission, we will reconvene as an executive board and continue on at this time.
I'm sorry, one moment. Lisa 27, I'm recounting.
Did you count Mary Tanis?
She cannot be counted.
Yeah, but she's still, no, she's not.
She's been,
Commissioned
Oh,
April.
They sent a letter saying that?
the board decommissioned her. No, even better, I've got her saying that.
Yesterday,
Last
we
night.
had 26.
Last night.
It was last night.
We do have 26.
Yeah, okay, I didn't realize she wasn't.
Yeah.
Okay, so continuing right on. And we did have one public comment, Mary Tennis, but she's already given us her statement, so we are beyond that at this time. We're looking for the approval of minutes from the May 18th executive session.
Motion to approve.
Second. Motion and second that we approve the minutes from May 18th, 2023. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, the same? Motion carries. Thank you. Report from the chair. I have one quick thing. I don't have to get through this whole year without having anything. Last month, we went to, Justin, myself, George, and Ty, we went to the NARCA conference in Detroit, Michigan. And I'm pleased to announce this morning that two of our esteemed colleagues, Justin Kill and Ty Warner, were voted into prestigious positions. Justin, congratulations on being voted into Senior Vice President of NARCA. And Ty Warner, he was voted in as Chairman of the NARCA Executive Directors Council. Congratulations to both of you gentlemen. I'm quite sure that you'll serve our area well. That concludes my report. Report from the Executive Director.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. We did have a wonderful conference in Detroit and appreciated the participation of all the folks that Richard mentioned. I was just going to say real quick, some of the things we recapped there or talked about there were just the continued housing crisis. We had the president of the American Planning Association speaking to us, which was a great person to have present, and focusing mostly on housing issues experienced nationally. Also, the head of the charging network system for General Motors also talked about electric vehicle charging and their national rollout. That was 2 days before them announcing the Tesla standard, so it explains why he was coy on some of the questions that were asked about charging. But just as a little side note, if you haven't been to Detroit recently, there's a lot of lessons to be learned there. They have come a long way than Detroit that many have seen images of recently of decayed buildings and whatnot. They are literally improving from the inside out. And downtown Detroit is really almost unrecognizable from a lot of the images that you see. So if you have not been to Detroit recently, I would really encourage you to go and see all the great work that they've done to their riverfront, to their downtown, and we heard from Detroit Downtown Partnership, Riverwalk Consortium, other groups about their efforts to collaborate and make that happen. And it's a success story that I think has a lot of lessons for us here in Northwest Indiana.
I'm glad to hear that, because when I worked for Ford Motor Company and they sent me to Detroit and I went to a gas station, there were armed guards out there at the gas station. So that's improved.
There's still a ways to go, just like in most of our cities, but they're on the right track. So,
And to add to what Bob had to say, I lived there during that period of time. It was unsafe to be on expressways or buy gas in that area.
So that was the NARC conference. Just as a quick preview, you already know this on the agenda. We have 2 items that are required for us to produce as part of our federal obligation as a metropolitan planning organization. So I'm not going to steal any thunder from those 2 presentations, and I'm talking about NWI 2050 Plus, which is the long-range plan for the region, and the Transportation Improvement Program. But I just want to take this opportunity while I'm talking to just thank staff for all the effort that went into this. We had great consultant help on this plan, as you know, and you received a presentation on this in May, which they will recap. But staff did a tremendous job tying up loose pieces, fleshing out things, providing elements that we did not have access to from consultants. and made, I think, a fantastic looking document, which, yes, we did kill some trees, but wanted you to be able to take back an actual physical copy of this plan with you, which is why you have it on your desk. This version is posted on the website for anyone that does not have a physical copy, and we'll do the final version, assuming that it's approved today after that. So I just wanted to thank staff for all that effort and for the Transportation Improvement Program as well, particularly Charles and all his work trying to figure that out in advance before we get to those agenda items. But last item I have, we have a staff recognition, and we recognize staff for significant milestones in their employment with NERC. And this meeting, or actually May, but commemorates the 5-year anniversary for Candace Eklund being a NERC staff person. Candy, as you know, is the one that interfaces with you and pulling together these meetings and making sure that you have what you need, and responds to a whole lot of requests that you may or may not be aware of to keep you all informed and engaged and understanding what NERC does and getting what you need to be effective commissioners. So I just want to thank Candy for her service and give her this nice, snazzy official. And that's all I have. That's it. I'm good. That's all.
Okay. All right, moving right along, Environmental Management Policy Committee, Bill Emerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. We did not meet since our last executive meeting of the Environmental Management Policy Committee. But our May meeting, we did discuss, there was some discussion of the BP carbon capture and storage investment project. I'd gone to a elected officials public meeting and then a public meeting on this a few months ago, and we were discussing it at the Environmental Policy Committee, and we thought it'd be a good idea to have all communities be informed about it and give them information about it. So I want to thank Ty, Mr. Chairman, and also Kathy for putting this together based on that discussion and inviting them in to speak. So today we have Damian Bilbao from BP, Vice President for U.S. Low Carbon Ventures, to give us a presentation on that.
Great, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you guys hear me okay? Yes. All right, excellent. So we're going to do this old school. We're going to do this without slides because I messed up the file from last night, which means it doesn't work on the computer. So you're going to pretend that I have some really cool pictures to reference here, and at some point someone might come here and try to make it work, and we'll see if that happens. In the meantime, I appreciate the time to talk to you guys this morning. You guys are quite busy, and the fact you've given us some time to share a little bit about what we're doing, hoping to do, and answer your questions. We greatly appreciate that. So I'm going to talk about what BP is doing locally, nationally, and in particular here in Northwest Indiana, why we're so excited about it, and why we think it's actually a catalyst for a large-scale investment in the future that would put Northwest Indiana on the map, rivaling some of the largest opportunities globally. See how I stretch that out until the slides pop up? That's extremely good. Thank you very much. Sorry for the hassle. So let me start with carbon capture, okay, and hydrogen. And that's really what we're talking about today. We're talking about two primary things: providing energy that's affordable, secure, and accessible for our communities, and making sure that we make a positive material environmental impact and economic impact to the community. So Northwest and Indiana, and actually Indiana in general, over the last several years, as there was an energy boom across the United States in oil and gas drilling, Indiana didn't participate in the same way that some of your neighbors did. The subsurface characteristics of Indiana just so happen to not lend themselves to the kind of scale of investment for oil and gas drilling that some of the other states have, Ohio in particular, and even into Kentucky. Some parts of Indiana have, but not at the same scale. But it just so happens that Indiana is advantaged in its subsurface potential for the injection and storage of carbon, CO2. And that's particularly important in a world where there is more investment growth occurring in new energy sources and decarbonization than in any other industry. Whether you agree with the policy or not, the numbers are fact, and the investment growth in new sources of energy and carbon capture and decarbonization is the fastest growing sector of the economy. Indiana is advantaged in its subsurface for the injection and storage of CO2. And a couple of years ago, the legislature, in their wisdom, decided to pass a bill that clarified the law in Indiana around carbon capture. That is taking CO2 from a variety of sources, whether they're refineries like Whiting Refinery in Northwest Indiana, which has been there for 134 years, helping to take CO2, instead of going up in the air, you capture it, process it, and you inject it over about a mile underground and keep it there forever, and instead of releasing it into the atmosphere. Whether it's a refinery, a steel plant, or any other source of emissions, you can capture that and put it on the ground. Why is that significant? Not only do you have the potential for having the total emissions of the Lake County area, but you also have then the opportunity for creating hydrogen. So let's talk a little bit about why that's significant for Indiana. So you might imagine as a company headquartered in London, we use this map quite a bit, and that is to compare the scale of opportunity in the U.S. Midwest to the United Kingdom. So between Chicago and Pittsburgh, you're talking about a distance of around Scotland to London, right? Significant scale of economic opportunity. The GDP of the Midwest is larger than that of the United Kingdom, has a broader geographic area, about the same number of people, almost 2.5 times the emissions of the United Kingdom, twice the power demand. As you can see from the numbers, a robust economic opportunity for any potential investment. What's particularly significant is in the last couple of years, there at the bottom, where we talk about supportive policies, the U.S. Midwest had, and in particular Indiana, has the policies which enable investment in a variety of ways around new energy sources and what we're going to talk about today. And that's particularly important for any company, including BP. So I'm going to share a little bit, not just about what the projects are that we're looking at, but the planning process within our company and how our executives look at these investment opportunities and how they compare against each other. So the first thing we look at is geographies. Where is the opportunity for investment? Where's the scale of demand for energy? And the U.S. Midwest and Indiana rise to the top globally in terms of that opportunity, and this is just an illustration of that. So the next thing becomes, well, where could we invest on some of the largest growth areas of the economy? And hydrogen is America's next growth industry, and it's not just in the U.S., it's globally. Hydrogen, very first thing you learn about in high school chemistry, is the largest growing sector of the decarbonization economy. You can burn hydrogen without any emissions. You can use it as a heat source. In the future, we believe you can use it to move trucks, to move locomotives, to move ships. There's really two primary ways of creating clean hydrogen. One is you split a water molecule, and the other way that you can do is by splitting the natural gas molecule. In Northwest Indiana, we believe you can take that natural gas molecule, split it. We take the hydrogen in one direction to burn it, and you take the CO2 in the other direction and inject it in the ground. That's why that CO2 potential in Indiana is significant, because we can take all the natural gas that might be produced elsewhere, bring it here to Indiana, split it into hydrogen and CO2, inject the CO2, sell the hydrogen as a heat or fuel source, either to refineries, steel companies, or for use in transportation. At BP, we believe that the potential scale and market for hydrogen is going to not just double, but quadruple by 2050. That is a massive ramp up in growth, positioning Indiana pretty uniquely to take advantage of that growth in product demand around hydrogen. And it's not just that Indiana's positioned well from a subsurface and technical perspective, but you have the clarity around the law. You're one of the few states in the United States that's clear on how the law for CO2, with a lot of thanks to the legislature and the passage of HB 1209 a couple of years ago for that. You have strong industry, you have quality labor, and you have a subsurface that's advantage versus some of your neighbors. So a few years ago, your neighbors had an advantage subsurface for oil and gas production. Over the next 20 years, Indiana has a potential for, across the state, subsurface potential for CO2 injection, which means it could be a source of hydrogen in that market that's quadrupling over the next 20 plus years. That's the opportunity BP is looking at in Indiana, in Northwest Indiana, specifically around Whiting, and that's why we're progressing carbon capture in Northwest Indiana. So before I turn to the next slide, let me talk about that just briefly, because we get a lot of questions about this. CO2 capture. Our plans, our intention is to take CO2 that is captured, collected, processed at Whiting, transported southeast, about 80 to 100 miles, and put it about a mile underground, where the pressure of the stone and earth above it keeps it in place for decades and centuries to come. This is already being done in Illinois at a small scale. It's done in other parts of the world at different scales, something we have experience with because we've been an oil and gas company for a little while, and it's something we believe that Indiana is uniquely positioned for. Okay? If you have any questions about that, I'm happy to answer them. Yes, sir.
You talked about putting it in the ground.
Yes, sir.
Is there any effect on the ground with this in there that can affect our lives?
No, sir. So the plan is to put the CO2 about 4,000 to 7,000 feet underground. All right. So your water source, for example, is located 500 feet or more shallow. Right. Anything below that, the water becomes much too salty to consume or to use for agriculture. So you're talking about 6 to 8 times deeper than your water source, with all kinds of layers of sand, stone, granite, etc., sitting on top of it. Plus, before we inject any CO2 in the ground, we would have to demonstrate to federal and state regulators that is not only injected but will stay there. And then we have to invest for multiple wells that monitor that CO2 to demonstrate on an ongoing basis that it's staying underground. So we believe we have the experience doing it. It's being done elsewhere, and there's enough many layers of regulatory oversight and technical oversight to make sure that we can demonstrate.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. So why is carbon capture and hydrogen significant? Well, in their own right, they're a significant investment. We're talking multi-billion dollars of investment opportunity just in Northwest Indiana. But beyond that, if you have hydrogen, you create the opportunity for other investments. So for example, just one illustration. If you have Indiana clean hydrogen, and you have a refinery in Indiana, and if you can access corn, and I think that's probably not difficult to do around here, you can combine it and actually make a clean jet fuel, which creates another investment opportunity and another source of employment and another product that can be sold into the area. If you're building a carbon capture facility, you're building a hydrogen facility, and you're building a clean jet fuel facility, where you're going to need more power, right? So you're going to need to invest in the production of additional clean power in the area. And if you're doing all that, if you're producing that hydrogen, well, you probably want to find a way of liquefying that and using it for trucks. So at BP, we already have investment in a company that installs electric vehicle charging sites at some of our retail sites around the country. We'd also like to be able to offer clean hydrogen for trucking, because we believe trucks will struggle to run on batteries, like EV batteries, but we think there's the opportunity for them to move with clean hydrogen, which that's another opportunity. So the purpose of this last slide here is to illustrate that when you anchor an opportunity around a refinery like Whiting, each of these bubbles represents one more thing you can do, one more investment and employment opportunity, that it all starts from the fact that in Indiana, it is possible to inject CO2 in the ground. The hydrogen, biofuels, clean diesel and biogas that we develop with landfills and dairy farms, you can blend that with hydrogen and make it even cleaner than the original clean hydrogen that splits the natural gas molecule. You can use that for rail, you can use that for marine, so on and so forth. So you can see a vision here of over 10 plus years of investment opportunity. Now, all of these, as you might imagine, as we look at our own planning purposes, each of these needs to compete internally with similar projects around the world. None of these is a slam dunk, no matter where you do it. And so what we're trying to do in Indiana is demonstrate that the scale of the opportunity makes each of these in their own right more competitive within our company per capita. Right? And that's the name of the game right now, is how does a project in Northwest Indiana compare not just with a project in Illinois or Virginia or Florida, but in Australia, in China, and elsewhere? Because we are able to invest globally, and those projects need to compete against each other. Assuming a success case where each of these rises to the top, the quantum of investment in Northwest Indiana would be in excess of $10 billion, just from the BP perspective. The beauty of the carbon capture bill that was put in place a couple of years ago is that it applies to the entire state, and it applies to any project. It doesn't try to pick winners and losers. It affords the opportunity for investment across the state for any company that wishes to pursue it. We're hoping to be one of those companies that moves forward, and that's why we have folks out on the ground today talking to some of your neighbors and community members on the first step of that, which is the carbon capture piece. I've rambled on long enough. Why don't I just pause there, see if there's any questions to any of that. I realize that's a lot of context real quick. Yes, ma'am.
Quick question. So how is it stored underground? Is it in pipes, and then if that infrastructure were to fail, would that cause issues, or is it just so far underground that it wouldn't cause any issues?
Yeah, so first of all, think of it this way. We're taking natural gas from underground, we're splitting the CO2 and the hydrogen from that molecule, and we're putting the CO2 back in the ground and keeping the hydrogen. When we put it back in the ground, we put it in a liquid form, and we're injecting it back into that sand, then the pressure keeps it there. So I like to explain oil and gas production as a sponge filled with chocolate milk, and we just put a straw and we suck the chocolate milk out of the sponge. That's basically what oil and gas looks like. We're just now putting a straw into the sponge and putting a liquid CO2 into that sponge and keeping it there. And it's the thousands of feet of rock that sits on top of it and the pressure on that keeps that product there in perpetuity.
Yeah, because that was the one question that kind of came up from constituents. And then the other question was, what is like a timeline for when this could happen realistically in our area?
Yeah, so we already have folks on the ground working to acquire the contractual rights to inject the CO2, right? And gathering the subsurface information to make sure we inject in the right place. A big part of this is knowing where to inject it, how far the CO2 will spread, because we want to make sure that we're entering into contracts with everybody whose land sits on top of that. Right? You don't want the CO2 to spread out farther than you've contracted, and then you have to go back and talk to someone you haven't talked to already. And then once we do that, then we have an internal decision around, okay, we now know our rights, we know what the opportunity looks like, how does it compare to the other 6 or 7 we're progressing around the world? And that's the economic decision. And so some point in the next 3 years, we're going to have to make an economic decision around whether we're moving forward. And then the projects themselves take 2 to 4 years beyond that, between the carbon capture construction and the hydrogen construction. So you're talking about 2030 before you're really injecting CO2, producing hydrogen. It's a long-term opportunity. In a success case, you're talking about 10 to 12,000 construction jobs. Long-term, about 2,000 to 2,200 permanent jobs. But again, all of that is success case and has to compete internally for capital. I don't want to leave anyone with the impression that these are all done deals, slam dunks. There's a lot of work that needs to be done here to prove these up. Yeah, thanks for your question. Any other questions I can answer?
Where does Northwest Indiana fit into this? You know, we don't have natural gas here. I understand you have your refinery here.
Yes, sir.
And you're going to be injecting it 80 miles south of here, southeast, I guess. Is it like you have to refine this this natural gas at your refinery and then ship it there?
Yes, sir. So think about a refinery as a big chemistry set. Right? What we're finding around the world is that refineries tend to be your best opportunity, not just for the last 100 years to produce refined gasoline, diesel, but for the next 100 years to produce clean energy. And so Whiting would be the site where we would bring the natural gas, we would produce the hydrogen, we would produce clean jet fuel, etc., and then the CO2 would be sent south for injection, just because the subsurface under the refinery is shallower and not as advantaged as it is further south. We believe it is safer, more responsible to inject it further south. That's why we're looking down there. But the core of the employment and the investment would actually occur within, let's call it a circumference around the refinery. Yes, sir.
How is it transported?
The CO2 would be transported by pipeline south.
Okay.
Be one big pipeline south, relatively big. It's not a 12-inch pipe or 6-inch pipe. It's bigger than that. It's still being designed. The route is still being selected. It would move south, and then from there it would move out to different injection points. Yes.
How is injecting liquefied CO2 into the ground different from something like fracking, which has environmental concerns attached to it?
Yeah, no, fair question. So fracking, the whole purpose of fracking is to fracture the rock, right? That's why it's called fracking. The intent is you go in there and you're effectively splitting the rock so that the oil and gas flows. The way CO2 injection works is you're pumping the liquid CO2 into the sand like that chocolate milk into the sponge. So there is no fracture of the rock that occurs. It occurs, it's a different subsurface characteristic as well. And that's why we're learning from the existing projects that exist around the world. The closest one is the ADM one in Illinois and elsewhere. So it's a different technology, it's a different technical use of the rock. If that makes sense. And it's a fair question. I think it's one of the reasons why we're spending as much time as we are in the community holding these forums to answer questions around it. Fortunately, we try to cram in about 2 hours of content in about 20 minutes, but if you see one of these community forums, we would appreciate your attendance and questions just like that. Yes, sir.
What is the downside of the CO2 being pumped into the sand? Any potential for any thoughts or any factors?
Yeah. So the biggest objection to CO2 or the carbon capture is that it extends the life of the hydrocarbon industry. So when you see some groups speak out against carbon capture, they'll say that the solution is actually no carbon capture and no hydrocarbon industry at all. If you're able to capture the emissions of a hydrocarbon product and inject them in the ground, that only extends the life of the oil and gas industry. So that tends to be the biggest objection. I won't surprise you to say we take a different view, and so do a lot of smart folks at places like Stanford and Princeton, Notre Dame, etc., which is there is no way to achieve the kind of decarbonization objectives that were laid out in Kyoto and in other global forums without carbon capture. There's no way to achieve the temperature reductions that have been laid out by a variety of industries and a variety of governments without the use of carbon capture at scale globally. Yes, sir.
Hydrogen transported.
In different ways. So hydrogen can either be blended into a natural gas pipeline. So if you have an existing natural gas pipeline, you could replace 5 to 20% of that natural gas with hydrogen and immediately lower the overall emissions of your natural gas system. You could do a dedicated hydrogen line for a short distance, say to a neighboring production facility or a port. You could liquefy it, put it on the trucks, and take it out to retail sites for fueling of trucks. So there's different ways of transporting hydrogen. Last questions? No, I think.
Mine were answered with the pipeline goal.
Unless there's anything else, I'm happy to stick around for a few minutes if anyone has any questions. If not, thank you very much for the time. Really appreciate it. I know you guys have a busy agenda, a lot to cover. Thank you for taking a few minutes. Yes, Kay.
Just an announcement. Back last fall, we did an educational event here on carbon capture sequestration. Department of Energy presented. I will provide Kathy the link to those videos so that it can be forwarded to your commission members so they can, at their leisure, listen to 3 hours worth of technical, really cool stuff. Thank you.
Anyone needs a nap? Yeah. Thanks again. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bello. And our next meeting is August 3rd at 9 a.m. right here. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Right along, Finance and Personnel Committee, Wendy Biss.
Good morning, everyone. The Finance and Personnel Committee met this morning. We reviewed the financial reports for May and June of 2023. We also reviewed the bank reconciliations and the claim registers for May and June 2023. We found them to be in good order, and we appreciate the efforts of Talea and that team for their efforts. We reviewed an amendment to the 2023 budget to add additional revenue and expenses for the Marquette Greenway project and a non-for-profit transportation feasibility study. There is one piece of action item for your consideration today. It is a request for the approval of Drive Clean Indiana, and Kathy Luther will present this contract.
Yes, many of you are aware that we sub-grant our congestion mitigation air quality public education program to Drive Clean Indiana. They have two fundamental roles. They've taken over the public education piece, which is billboards, advertising, just letting the public know behavioral changes that can help us reduce emissions and reduce congestion on the roads. And the second role is the Green Fleets program, which provides technical support to any of you, also private sector, who operate fleets, and they will give you a kind of a fleet inventory, identify ways you can save money, invest in some of the newer technology. They help put together a lot of what you need for a grant-ready project. So we fund that with this contract. It's a sub-grant from our congestion mitigation air quality grant.
Any questions? The committee has a favorable recommendation for this, and I now need to bring it before this group for official approval.
Move the adoption.
Second. Motion is second that we approve the drive claim request for 2023. Is there any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, the same. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. The next meeting of the Finance and Personnel Committee will be on September 21st at 8 a.m. See you there. Thank you, sir.
Technical Planning Committee, Kevin Bursky.
The Technical Planning Committee met on Tuesday, July 11th, and forwarded 3 actions for consideration today with favorable recommendations. The first action is Resolution 2311, Fiscal Year 2022-2066 Transportation Improvement Program Amendment 2210. Mr. Bradsky will first provide a summary with a 30-day comment period for the amendment, then explain the action. The comment report starts on page 22 of your packet, followed by the resolution. Mr. Bradsky.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and other members of the commission. I have one resolution and one amendment before you this morning on this section. Resolution 23-11 is for amendment 22-10. Trying to keep me straight in the office and with Tom's resolution, it's been, anyway. The amendment and resolution are shown on pages 23 to 31 of your packet. Concerning the public comment report, the projects listed in these amendments were released for public comment on June 13th and closed on July 4th. As stated in the public comment report on page 22. There was one question received during this time, and that question was asked if Hammond's local tracks project, the Governor's Parkway Bridge, was a project in this amendment, which it is not. The email was then forwarded to Hammond and their project manager for follow-up with that commenter. There was no comment, it was just a question, I should say. Prior to sending these amendments out for public comment, we sent these amendments to members of the Intergovernmental Consultation Group, or the ICG, for their comments on June 12th. With NERC's agreement with the ICG, if no responses are received within 7 days, concurrence is granted. We did not receive any comments from the members of the ICG during this time, so concurrence was granted. There was comments for clarification on 2 different projects. One was an NDOT project and one was Cherville's project. The comments for Cherville's project, which was DES number 1382603, it was phase 2 of their Kennedy Avenue. Asked if it was a non-exempt project, and being it was a non-exempt project, if it was in our long-range plan, which it is. The question concerning NDOT's project was a clarification of the statement in the description that left turning improvements along the State Road 2 corridor. It is NERC's understanding in a statement from the project designer that NDOT has since removed any left turn moving improvements along this corridor. On to the amendments. Sorry. That was it on the public comment report. On to the amendments. The amendments were attached in today's commission packet. Amendment 22-10 contains 6 projects which are either new or modifications for fiscal years 24 and 2025. NDOT has added 3 new projects, 1 bridge rehab and 2 road rehab projects. City of LaPorte has eliminated a sidewalk project. Porter County added a new bridge replacement project. And as I alluded to earlier, Cherville added a substantial amount of funding for right-of-way for the project. Are there any questions? Mr. Chairman.
The Technical Planning Committee recommends adoption of Resolution 2311. We have a motion.
Motion, Wendy.
Second. Motion and second that we approve resolution 23-11. Is there any further discussion? All in favor signify by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The second action is for Resolution 2310, the adoption of the Long Range Metropolitan Transportation Plan, NWI 2050 Plus. Tom Vanderwood will first provide a summary of the 30-day comment period for the document, followed by a presentation of the plan. The comment report starts on page 32 of your packet, followed by the resolution.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Breitsky, Commissioner Breitsky. On page 32, there is a public comment report that was produced for draft NWI 2050 Plus. And what the draft was released for a 30-day public comment period beginning April 5, 2023. In conjunction with that public comment period, the draft was made available at our website, nerc.org. In addition, we held 4 public meetings to solicit comments and feedback. Those were held on April 5 in Maryville, April 10 in Hammond, April 12 in Michigan City, and April 13 in Valparaiso. The comments were received through email and mail. We did receive, in response, comments from 2 individuals. There were multiple comments per individual. We received comments from Susan Mahalo, representing the Nature Conservancy. Those were related to some of the land use recommendations, specifically the subject of low impact conservation design and inclusion of the Grand Calumet River as an environmental corridor. A full response is included in this report, but in summary, we did update some of the text of the plan to reflect those comments and to take those recommendations in the narrative. We also received 2 comments from David Wright of Gary Public Transportation Corporation, specifically related to the year of some of the data that was used on one of the tables. We did update that to 2019 data, which was agreed upon in the stakeholder group. We also included text related to identifying some of the GPTC routes as being regional routes in addition to those that had been already identified in the plan. So in summary, we received 3 or 4 discrete comments. Each one of those comments was addressed in the text, and the text was revised from the draft into this final draft that we're presenting here today. So having said that, I know that this body did receive a very detailed presentation on NWI 2050 Plus a few months ago. So today I'm just going to give a brief overview of the history of the project, the development of the plan, some of the implications of the plan, and then I'm just going to touch on each chapter in one slide. You can see that that document is it's a little bit more than 7 pages, so I'm going to try to condense this into 7. So NWI 2050 Plus is Northwest Indiana's Metropolitan Transportation Plan. This is, as Ty mentioned at the outset of the meeting, this is one of the core planning documents that are required by the U.S. Department of Transportation for our work here as a Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO. This is in addition to the Transportation Improvement Program and the Unified Planning Work Program, which was approved at the last meeting of this group. You can think of the Long Range Metropolitan Transportation Plan as the sort of vision, research, and consensus-based policy document that drives the transportation investment that's shown in the Transportation Improvement Program and the investment in the staff work that happens here, which is listed in the Unified Planning Work Program. So this is really the foundational document for our work here and in the region. We are required to update our plan every 4 years. The last plan was NWI 2050. And this particular plan is carrying forward some of the focus areas of NWI 2050. So it's really an update to that plan. It's not a brand new plan. It continues the idea of connected, renewed, united, and vibrant. Those principles are really the principles that drive this plan as well. It is updated though, so it does address the new legislation. I'm not going to say IIJA, I can't remember what the acronym means, but so that's the new transportation legislation, and it includes updated sections on resiliency, housing, carbon reduction, and freight. And one other bullet point, it must have a 20-year horizon, so it's a long-range plan, and it has to be fiscally constrained, meaning it's a realistic plan, and we produce cost estimates to ensure that any project idea that's included in this plan is rooted in actual expected resources that we have available for transportation projects. The timeline of the plan really began in May 2019 when NWI 2050 was adopted. As I said, this is a continuation of that plan. Planning for the update really began in earnest in February 22 when we issued an RFP for multiple consultants. Those consultants were under contract by 2022. And then between 2022 and April, staff and the consultants conducted a number of outreach events. We held public involvement events. We also had public involvement activities available through our website. And all the technical research and analysis was done, culminating in April of this year when the draft document was released for public comment. As I noted earlier, there was a 30-day public comment period. The draft that was presented during that public comment period and to this body a few months prior is substantially the same as what is being presented here today. It's only been sort of updated in terms of formatting and overall graphic design. And so that brings us to today, July 2023, where we anticipate that this board will adopt NWI 2050 Plus. One thing that you might note is that the arrow doesn't point to the adoption. It actually extends beyond the adoption because adoption is really the first step towards implementation. And that's, once the plan is adopted, we can then begin implementing it over the next few years. I will skip this slide because we kind of already touched on this. So as I mentioned, I'm going to try to compress 7 chapters into 7 pages. So I will just kind of briefly go over each one of these. The full document is in front of you as well as posted on our website online. So if you have any, and then if you have any questions, you can of course reach out to staff anytime. So chapter 1 is the introduction. This is kind of a required piece of information that we include in our plan. It just provides a general description of the metropolitan planning area, which is Lake, Porter, and 4 counties. It describes our public involvement activities that were associated with the plan development, including, as I said, some public workshops that were held, as well as the online engagement through a survey and through a mapping application. It also includes discussion of the federal planning requirements. So we can't forget that we are sort of obligated to meet certain criteria for the federal government, which is the funder of our work here, as well as the transportation projects that we have in the plan. And then it also addresses fiscal constraints. So it outlines our expected resources over the coming years. Chapter 2 is active transportation. This is the chapter that deals with bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. We'll note that we currently have 200 plus miles of trails built. So we've done a lot of work, but there's still a lot of planning to take place. Our network now includes most of the major facilities, the rail trails that you're all probably familiar with. So this plan actually kind of drills down a little bit more closely into some of the connections that will provide access onto those interstate highways of the bike trails. So we're looking at bike lanes and sidewalks and really the more detailed bicycle and pedestrian planning in this plan. Chapter 3 deals with climate and environment. This is one of those chapters that is sort of new in terms of the climate component. And this chapter really focuses on two things. One is strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So these are the emissions that really contribute to global warming and climate change. We were just talking about that with the representative from BP. And then the second focus of this chapter is to, given climate change and given some of the effects of greenhouse gas emissions, how do we increase resiliency? So how do we develop strategies to adapt to a changing environment? And so this chapter includes transportation and development objectives, including, for example, accelerating investment in electric vehicle charging infrastructure, but it also talks about more common themes that we've talked about for many years, including expanding access to transit and promoting compact, walkable communities. Let's see. Sorry about that. Chapter 4 deals with freight. I think we're all aware our location here on I-80, 94. We're aware of the influence of freight in this region. A couple facts here. Total freight tonnage in Northwest Indiana is expected to increase by 13% between 2017 and 2050. Total freight value is expected to increase by 42%. Over a third of employed individuals in Northwest Indiana are employed in freight-dependent industries, and over 52% of Northwest Indiana's GDP is generated by freight-dependent industries. So we recognize that there's a huge economic development component to freight, but we also realize that there are some externalities. So this chapter really focuses on some of those safety, mobility, infrastructure condition, and environmental impacts of freight movement. How do we accommodate this key component of our economy, but also mitigate some of the negative impacts? Some of the key strategies of the chapter are listed here. And this map, for example, is, probably can't read it very well, but it shows all gaps by type. Each one of those gaps represents some issue, whether it be a mobility issue or an infrastructure condition issue, to help us focus some of our resources where they're most needed. Chapter 5, land use. This is where actually NERC's work is kind of a little bit different from some of the more traditional MPO work. We really take a very robust look at land use and its impacts on our transportation network. So although this plan is called a Metropolitan Transportation Plan, it's really a comprehensive regional plan in that it deals with land use. So the land use component of this plan look at existing land use patterns, population trends, housing trends, and market gaps to develop a scenario-based development vision. And this very busy map shown on the screen, I think you saw it a few months ago, is the context-based development strategy map. So each one of these, either blobs of color or dots or lines, represents a unique part of Northwest Indiana, a unique development type. And so the land use chapter lays out, in recognition of the sort of varying characters of our communities, it lays out individual context-based strategies for each one of those development types. Chapter 6 deals with roads, and again, this carries over the goals of Northwest Indiana NWI 2050. Those are listed here, but it does update the overall set of maps and data that underlie our investments in the highway network. So you'll see that, for example, we're looking at, in this chapter, safety, mobility, and other highway-related metrics. And each one of these is associated with a couple new objectives. So what's the relevance of this particular chapter? There's no new sort of investments identified in this chapter, but what this really does is it kind of lays that framework for us as an organization to begin identifying those transportation projects either for inclusion in the TIP or for inclusion in a future long-range plan that are really the type of strategic investments that we need. So this helps us just kind of focus our efforts and our resources where they're most needed. And finally, Chapter 7 deals with transit. The bulk of this chapter is really focused on conceptualizing a regional bus system. And so there were two conceptual proposals that were outlined in this chapter: a grid system, which is on the left, and then a hub system, which is on the right. And each one of these concepts were kind of evaluated against a consistent set of criteria, including cost effectiveness, overall municipalities served, transit demand areas served, accessibility to environmental justice, populations, and so on. And this chapter recommends moving forward, at least as the basis for future discussion and future planning, a hub system. The next steps for the plan, if adopted, would be to publish the adopted plan, so we would make a few changes to the document to reflect that it was adopted here today. And then we still need to work through our air quality conformity determination. And this is a process that demonstrates conformity with the emissions budgets that are published as part of the state implementation plan. You've probably heard talk of the air quality work that happens here, but in a very general sense, each state is permitted to have a certain level of pollution and air pollution, and our plans must conform with that budget that's been given to us in consultation with Indiana Department of Environmental Management, EPA, and so on. And typically we do adopt this concurrently with the TIP and the long-range plan. However, this year, because our travel demand model was recently updated, we have a bit of a problem with nonconformity in our ozone motor vehicle emissions budgets, which is the acronym there, for the years 2030 and 2035. So our staff has been in consultation with our partners, and we're fairly confident that new budgets will be published in the Federal Register in the coming months. So once that amendment occurs, we will have to hold a separate public hearing for the air quality conformity determination, and then we'll bring that back to this body for adoption by resolution. So that's the one outstanding real item on the plan today. Again, we're recommending adoption of the plan. INDOT and FHWA will wait, and FTA will wait until that air quality conformity determination has been gone through the process, at which point then they will recognize that plan as our official long-range plan. And then, and again, these are not happening necessarily in order shown here, but we will then, the next step, of course, as I said, is to begin implementation. And this happens at our topical committees. This will happen through publication, through social media, strategic email blasts. And then we're also hoping that we can work with individual communities, get out to the region, present the plan to your town boards, and we're, of course,
Town councils, not town boards.
town council or planning commissions, whoever is the relevant body in your community, redevelopment commission. And of course, we'd be willing to go attend various chambers or clubs and speak to the plan.
Does anybody have any questions for Tom? Now, this is our regional roadmap for Northwest Indiana, in coordination, cooperation with our communities. I hope you take home and read all 534 pages. We thank all those who participated in putting this together, and we, as a technical planning committee, recommend adoption of Resolution 2310.
So moved. Second. Motion and second that we approve resolution 23-10, Northwest Indiana 2050 plus long-range metropolitan transportation plan. Is there any other discussion? All in favor signify by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the final action is for Resolution 2305, fiscal year 2024-2028, Transportation Improvement Program for Invest NWI 2024-2028. Charles Bradsky will first provide a summary of the 30-day comment period for the amendment, then explain the action. The comment report starts on page 36 of your packet, followed by the resolution and a full fifth document. Mr. Bradsky.
Mr. Chairman, adoption, the public comment report is on page 36, as Mr. Brzezinski has it mentioned. It was released for a 30-day public comment on March 6th of 2023 and ended on April 7th of 2023, not 22 and 21. We did not go back in time. The draft tip included all the projects were made available on our website and other social media platforms. And during this, we also, even though it was outside of the public comment period, we did have open houses for the long-range plan, and so we combined this tip into those open houses. We did not receive, staff did not receive any public comments on the tip adoption during that period or at the open houses. NERC also submitted the draft tip to NDOT and US DOT, Federal Highway and FTA, Federal Transit Administration. And there were two comments that were received from Federal Highway. One was there was a slight deficit in a couple of years. Again, my fault. I'd like to point that out, make that clear. I know better. I submitted it with some deficits in there. The tip is required to be fiscally constrained. In other words, I can only spend the money that I say I'm going to have, just like the checkbook. And I had a couple deficits in there. I did go back and correct those, as you will see. And then the other comment from Federal Highway was, with Federal Highway funds, we either use those funds in that year or we lose them. They just disappear. So one option that we have is we do loan those to other NPOs in the state and get those back in future years. And Federal Highway asked how we show that. And we did show that in our fiscal constraint tables. So moving on to NERC's Transportation Improvement Program for fiscal years 24 to 2028. Most of you know what the tip is, but those of you who don't, I'll go into it. The what, when, who, why, and how. It is the short range plan. It's meant to be for 4 years, the current year plus 3 years. But NDOT has requested that Federal Highway allow for 5 years. because they prefer a 5-year for their planning purposes. Federal Highway does allow that, they just don't look at that 5th year. So therefore, all the MPOs in Indiana use a 5-year TIP. It is federally mandated, must be comprehensive, continuing, and cooperative. Included is a list of all multimodal surface transportation that have been funded, at least in part with federal dollars, or are regionally significant to the transportation network. So a regionally significant project is any transportation project that is on a facility which serves regional transportation needs and normally would be included in the travel demand modeling for the region's network, no matter what the funding source is. So that includes any major projects to the toll road, to the toll bridge, must be included in the TIP, even though they have no federal funds on it. We just show those as other funds or as private funds. It also includes any streets, any bike paths, bike sidewalks, any highways, so on and so forth. There's also a list of the projects, and in each project must have a sufficient description. It must have the termini or the end limits of length, the total cost, the amount of federal funds, and the responsible agency. When it's updated every 4 years, as I mentioned, and immediately following are NOFA or call for projects. NOFA stands for Notice of Funding Availability, if you haven't heard that term. Our NOFA is held in the fall and winter, and immediately following that, we write the TIP for the following that. And then it's brought to this body for their approval after it's been reviewed by NDOT and USDA Department of Transportation. Who includes everybody that has input into the TIP adoption. That includes Federal Highway, Federal Transit, NDOT, RTA is a Regional Transportation Administration. They are located in Chicago. The NERC Commission, local governments, transit operators, and the public at large. As I mentioned, there was a 30-day public comment period, and we had the open houses. Why? As Tom had mentioned, it is how we implement our long-range plan. And the projects that are in the TIP must support what's in the long-range plan. And following our long-range plan, which is using the 16 principles on the wall directly in front of me. And as I mentioned, there was only one comment from Federal Highway on it. Now, per federal guidance, EJ, environmental justice, and Title VI areas have priority. After our call for projects, there's usually sometimes there's some heartburn with some communities that they feel that certain other communities might get preference, and they do get preference because they are an environmental justice area or they are in Title VI area. On the packet, pages 51 to 58 show several maps that we use to determine our environmental justice areas that were given to us by the U.S. Census. How we do this by using Federal Transportation Acts, the Infrastructure Investment and Job Act, IIJA, and the bipartisan infrastructure law in our NOFA. That's how we build our, that's how we build the TIP. We also use performance-based planning. IIJA and Bill continue to require states and MPOs to establish target metrics, measure and assess performances, progress towards successful completion of goals. Just as the FAST Act and the MAP 21 did in 2012 and 2015. Now, we have several different funding categories. We get about $30 million a year annually to spend on transportation projects. And the federal guidelines normally gave us, in the past they've given us 4 different areas to spend those monies in. But this year they have, or actually it's 10, including federal transportation or federal transit. In the past we've had Surface Transportation Block Grant, which is kind of a general fund. It can be used just for about anything. We have CMAQ, or Congestion Mitigation Air Quality. Those dollars can be spent on projects that improve congestion or air quality. We have Highway Safety Improvement Program, HSIP, which is to improve the safety of our roadways and our infrastructure. We have Transportation Alternatives, that's for active transportation or other multimodal. New under the IIJA and Bill are the CRP, which is Carbon Reduction Program. And that is a way of reducing our carbon footprint. The last one that is brand new is called PROTECT, and that is promoting resilient operations for transformative, efficient, and cost-saving transportation. That is to make our infrastructure more resilient to climate change. And on the FTA side, we have 5307, which is also a general fund that can be used for transit. We have 5339, that is for enhanced mobility of seniors and individuals with disabilities. 5339 is state of good repair for rail. And 5337 is state of good repair for rail. And 5339 is state of repair for buses and bus facilities. What's new with the IIJA and Bill, in addition to the continuation of funding for our roads, bridges, rails, transit, ports, and airports, an inclusion of the electric grid, water delivery, and broadband, improving those systems. It also has funding to help fuel a low carbon economy, improve air and water quality throughout our nation, and an additional emphasis on Vision Zero, or Safe Streets for All, making our streets safe for any of the users, whether they're cyclists, pedestrians, cars. And it's Safe Streets for All looks at everything. It looks at vehicles, the safety improvements that go into vehicles, the design of projects. Also, how can it make the pedestrians more cognizant, for instance, or the bicyclists more cognizant of roadways going on, and improve resiliency of our nation's infrastructure for climate change. And lastly, removal of barriers for opportunity for current infrastructure. That is reconnecting communities, as I don't know if you've seen that in some of the grants that are available. The next 2 slides, I just want to point out to you that we are fiscally constrained. If you look at one of the bottom 2 rows, you can see that we are. We do not show a deficit in any of the years except for 2028. 2028 is an illustrative year, and Federal Highway does not look at that year. But in our TIP, the 24, 25, 26, and 27 are all fiscally constrained. This is the FTA side. Basically, we budget for the funds we are expecting to get, and we divvy that up among all of our transit providers. So what's next? Today we are asking for your consideration for approval so that the list of projects can proceed. Until then, we are operating under our current TIP, the 22 to 2026 TIP. NDOT and USDOT have reviewed our proposed TIP, or our draft TIP that is in your packet today, and they are awaiting for the new air quality conformity numbers that Tom had mentioned earlier. So once we get those numbers and our TIP is approved by both this commission, this body, and Federal Highway, Federal Transit Administration, and NDOT, then they will be implemented by NERC. Are there any questions?
Is it correct that the projects that are listed in here, where there's a local commitment that's listed in the TIP, the local community has committed that they're going to be able to produce that local funds, right?
Yes. There are a couple of projects that was pointed out to me last week that did not get into the TIP. I don't know what happened, and my apologies. All the projects that have funding in 24 and 25 are in the TIP. So those projects that were not included are not in jeopardy. Any projects that are in 24 and 25, in the past 6-7 months, we did make an attempt to do those as amendments into the 2022 to 2026 TIP. So they are already included in our current TIP.
I asked specifically because of the north-south corridor that the city of LaPorte is proposing. I get asked about this frequently. They're indicating on here that they're going to be able to produce $17.1 million in local funds for that project. Have they been able to demonstrate that to you? That
they have not. Now, they do have funds in 2025 for planning. That is contingent on them producing a financial plan. Both Federal Highway, actually all Federal Highway, NDOT, and NERC has told them that they need to produce a financial plan. Federal Highway says you need to provide a financial plan for the next phase. And both NDOT and NERC have gone one step further and said, because of the cost and the size of that, they need to produce a financial plan. LaPorte County and the city of LaPorte need to produce a financial plan for the entire cost of phase 1, which is roughly $18 million. LaPorte County is group 2. As a point of information, they only get $2 million annually a year. So federal funds, so they need to find some other source to fund the construction of that, which is roughly $13 million.
And to be clear, if that financial plan is not developed and those funds cannot be identified, this will be delisted from the TIP.
Correct.
Thank you.
We'll need the cooperation, cohesiveness of all your communities within LaPorte County. That's what you guys can get together and make an agreement. That's what I would recommend. So, any other questions for Charles? If not, the Technical Planning Committee recommends adoption of Resolution 2305.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second that we approve resolution 23-05 for fiscal year 2024 through 2028 TIP in West Northwest Indiana, 2024 through 2028. Is there any further discussion? All in favor signify by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Motion carries. Thank you.
The next meeting of the Technical Planning Committee will be Tuesday, September 12th, 2023, 10 a.m. in NERC offices. There is no TPC meeting scheduled for August. Thank you.
Thank you. NERC Economic Development District Report, Ms. Kane.
Good
morning, thank you. Just wanted to report that we've been spending time working on some new federal grant initiatives. In June, there was an expression of interest submitted for an Economic Recovery Corps fellow that would assist with brownfield data collection. And currently, we are researching the new EDA Recompete program, which is limited to communities that have experienced a high level of the prime age employment gap. So those efforts are ongoing. We continue to outreach to communities regarding traditional EDA funding opportunities and also have discussions with them about competitiveness for applications. Also, we're continuing to outreach to partner organizations regarding the assignment of action items in the Economic Recovery and Resiliency Plan, and are also identifying additional partner organizations that are being brought to our attention through those conversations. And then lastly, I'd like to bring to your attention that the state of Indiana is pursuing a digital equity plan, and the Purdue Center for Regional Development is spearheading that. They're holding 6 sessions around the state. I attended the one in Delphi that was about a week or so ago. There'll be a virtual one that we will try to advertise on social media. Later on today, there'll be some information on NERC's social media about the digital asset maps. And if you could perhaps look at that and direct your staff to that, they're trying to make sure that the digital assets in the state are well documented. And I'll just read to you what that entails. It says the Digital Equity Task Force needs help creating a map of digital inclusion assets in Indiana. They're looking to map any organization or institution that offers digital inclusion programs or resources. This can include public or free Wi-Fi, computers for public use, hotspot lending programs, device lending programs, device giveaway programs, digital skill training programs, meeting space, or similar programs. So, for example, if you have a senior center that has computers set up that those seniors can use for free, that would be a digital asset. So we encourage you to look at those links on social media, and if you're aware of those resources in your community, please add them. If there are ones that are incorrect or no longer available, we ask that you please correct them. If you have any difficulty, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Screens.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's no representative from NDOT because Adam had to leave early. Is there any other business? Announcements.
I would just like to say that.
Go ahead.
Ty and I attended networking with the Northwest Indiana Forum over in Chesterton, and that was a good meeting. Did a lot of networking with people some that I haven't seen in a while. And we're trying to build, or we are building a new fire station and police station on our town grounds. And my town manager brought up a plan to build a new town hall. And I got a lot of irate citizens because they think the town grounds is a park. And we've never designated it as a park. It's the town grounds, and we couldn't afford to go out and purchase property and build this stuff somewhere else. So, and I also brought some newsletters. If anybody's interested in looking at what Cedar Lake does for a newsletter, I'll give you a copy if you want. As long as it lasts. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I just wanted to, we sent this out once, we'll probably send it out again, but thanks to the leadership of many of the communities in the 3 counties who supported NERC doing regional climate planning, which hopefully will bring a plan before you this fall. The Northwest Indiana is hosting the State Climate Leadership Summit on September 8th at Indiana University Northwest. Local elected officials and government staff can have free registration. It's a one-day event, September 8th. Registration closes August 25th. So I'd like to encourage to attend, or if you have staff that you can benefit. Well, there's the last session is the mayor's roundtable of mayors around the state who've done climate action.
Thank you. One announcement for me, the town of Maryville will be hosting a job fair next week from 11 to 3 p.m. at the Dean and Barbara White Community Center on the 27th.
It's a beautiful facility you have there.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say that after 2.5 years of planning and excitement, we are having the groundbreaking in Portage today of our outdoor learning center that will be attached to the library. So we've been working on this faithfully and had a lot of frustrations, and so we're very excited. This is going to be a beautiful facility for our community.
Thank you.
It's at 1 o'clock today.
Any other announcements? We're adjourned.